She raised her glass and smiled at her father, the patriarch of the wealthy Whitmore clan. It was a toast in his honor, celebrating 70 years of life, legacy, and leadership. But just hours later, he would collapse face-first into his custom-carved oak dining table, never to rise again. In a room full of smiling relatives and crystal chandeliers, someone had slipped him death in a champagne flute. And the most chilling part? His killer was family. Family reunions are supposed to be warm, nostalgic, filled with laughter, shared memories, and clinking glasses. But for the Whitmore family, one reunion would unveil the darkest truth of all, that behind the smiles and silverware, someone had murder on their mind. This is the story of how blood ties turned deadly. The Whitmore estate in the rolling hills of Virginia had always been a symbol of old money and legacy. Built by Archibald Whitmore's grandfather in the early 1900s, the mansion was more than just a home. It was a monument to power, generational wealth, and decades of unspoken family rivalries. That summer, Archibald had invited the entire family to celebrate his 70th birthday. It was also a semi-formal reunion, the first time in nearly 12 years that all of his children, nieces, nephews, and grandchildren would be gathered under one roof. At first glance, everything seemed picture perfect. The staff had been tripled. The lawns were trimmed to military precision. Even the vintage Rolls-Royce that hadn't been driven in years had been detailed and parked out front for show. But beneath the smiles and small talk, something had shifted. There was tension in the air, thick, unspoken, and electric. Archibald had built the Whitmore empire from a modest tobacco processing operation into a multi-million-dollar agricultural conglomerate, and he ruled over it with an iron fist. His children, however, weren't cut from the same cloth. Charles, the eldest, had always assumed he'd inherit the company. He'd sacrificed his own passions to stay in the business, managing warehouses and balancing books. Clara, the middle child, left for New York and rarely came home. She was ambitious, calculating, and had her own PR firm, yet she knew the value of being tied to the family name. Daniel, the youngest, was the black sheep, an artist-turned-tech investor who had once called the family business a plantation masquerading as a legacy. Still, all three showed up for the reunion with forced smiles and polite hugs. They weren't here for nostalgia. They were here because whispers had spread. Archibald was planning to announce his succession plans during the birthday toast. The dining room was straight out of a Southern Gothic novel. Crystal chandeliers, long mahogany table, monogrammed napkins, dozens of guests seated according to an invisible pecking order. At the head of the table, Archibald sat with his ever-commanding presence, nursing a crystal glass of brandy before switching to a flute of chilled champagne. He stood, silver-haired and strong-jawed, and raised his glass. "To family," he said, "and to the future of the Whitmore legacy." Clara stood up and joined him. "And to Dad. May you live another 70, she said, clinking her glass to his. There was laughter, applause, more clinking. Minutes later, as dessert was being served, Archibald's hands began to tremble. He coughed, once then again more violently. The room quieted. He tried to speak, but his lips contorted into a silent gasp. His eyes rolled back. Then he collapsed face-first onto his plate of creme brulee. Panic erupted. Calls for 911. Shouting. Someone started chest compressions while another fumbled with a phone flashlight. But it was too late. Archibald Whitmore, business titan, father, kingmaker, was dead. The initial report listed the cause of death as cardiac failure. At 70 and with a history of high blood pressure, it seemed believable, at least at first, but not to Charles, or Daniel, and especially not to the housekeeper, Maria, who told investigators she saw someone near Archibald's glass before the toast, someone who shouldn't have been anywhere near it. Whispers of poison began to circulate. Then came the coroner's second report. Traces of cyanide were found in Archibald's bloodstream, highly concentrated and unmistakably fatal. It hadn't been in his dinner. It had been in his champagne. This wasn't a medical emergency. It was a homicide. And the killer had likely toasted with the rest of them. As police launched a formal investigation, the family's civil mask quickly cracked. Each sibling had motive. Charles had discovered a week prior that Archibald was considering bypassing him in favor of Clara. Clara, in turn, had been facing bankruptcy from a failed campaign deal and stood to inherit a sizable fortune. Daniel had recently returned from Europe, having been cut off from the family trust fund 2 years ago after a very public argument with his father. Tensions exploded behind closed doors. What was once a grieving family now looked more like suspects in a murder mystery, because they were. And when detectives pulled surveillance footage from the estate, It showed someone slipping into the wine cellar minutes before the toast, and then reappearing with a tray of champagne flutes. That person wasn't staff. It was a Whitmore. If you've made it this far, hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you get updated on other related content on our channel, because next, we dive deeper into the twisted layers of this family's inheritance war, where every smile hides a motive, and every toast could be a countdown to murder. Everyone thought the old man had left things evenly, until the safe was opened. What was supposed to be a formality turned into a declaration of war. A fortune rerouted. An heir erased. And with that, the countdown to bloodshed began. For a family that once gathered around a fireplace sipping aged whiskey and reminiscing about childhood summers on the estate, the reading of Edgar Whitmore's will was expected to be just that, ceremonial. After all, Whitmore Industries, a multimillion-dollar furniture empire built on 4 generations of blood, sweat, and scandal, was something each family member had believed would be split evenly. That illusion shattered the moment the lawyer's voice cracked with tension and the envelope was torn open. In the walnut-paneled study of the Whitmore estate, a hush fell as family attorney Gerald Kessler removed the handwritten will from the leather folder and placed it delicately on the mahogany table. He adjusted his glasses, looking up at the circle of relatives. Edgar's 3 children, Caroline, Richard, and the youngest, 39-year-old Daniel, as well as a collection of spouses, cousins, and even Edgar's live-in nurse, Pamela, who awkwardly stood in the corner like a statue. Then Kessler read the first line. To my son Richard, I leave the house on Grafton Hill and the surrounding land. To my daughter Caroline, I leave my art collection and a trust of $500,000. To my youngest, Daniel, my legacy, my pride, my blood, I leave the controlling shares of Whitmore Industries and the authority to restructure its leadership as he sees fit. Silence. It roared louder than any scream ever could. Daniel's face twitched with confusion. This isn't what Dad told me. He said we'd all share it equally, Caroline whispered, her voice already brittle with betrayal. Richard's hands curled into fists so tight his knuckles turned white. Across the room, his wife clutched his arm tightly, her eyes flickering with something beyond surprise, strategy. It wasn't just what was given. It was what was omitted. Several cousins were left completely out. Long-time employees weren't even acknowledged. Pamela the nurse, who had spent nearly a decade taking care of Edgar in his final years, had been promised a small cottage, but it was nowhere in the will. Whispers began. Suspicion bloomed. Are we sure this was the last version? Caroline asked sharply. Where's the other one? The one he updated 2 years ago? She looked directly at Kessler, who went pale. I can only go by what Mr. Whitmore placed in his safe. This will was signed, dated 3 months before his death. Witnessed. Notarized. Daniel remained quiet. Too quiet. As the air grew tense, he slowly stood and left the room. That night, no one slept well. Caroline found herself scrolling through emails, rereading old correspondence with her father, trying to locate any hint that this twist was coming. Richard drank himself into silence, brooding by the fireplace, replaying a memory of Edgar saying, "A strong hand must run a legacy." Daniel, meanwhile, was seen walking out of the study again around midnight, this time with a USB flash drive in his pocket. By morning, Pamela the nurse was gone. Disappeared. No word left behind. No suitcase. Only the faint smell of her perfume and an empty bed. And then the rumors began. She forged the will, someone said. No, it was Daniel. He manipulated Edgar at the end when he was sick. What if the old man changed it on his own, after Caroline embarrassed him with that divorce? The Whitmore family reunion dinner was still scheduled for the coming weekend. It would be the first time in 5 years that all surviving family members would be under one roof. The local paper was even covering it, calling it a celebration of legacy at the legendary Lake Hollow estate. But behind the scenes, the reunion had become a powder keg. Whispers swirled about how Daniel had already fired 2 board members at Whitmore Industries. Caroline was consulting a lawyer about contesting the will. Richard was trying to secretly buy out shares to reclaim power. And then, a week before the reunion, an anonymous envelope was slipped under Gerald Kessler's door. Inside was a typed note. The will isn't real. Look at the signature. Edgar never wrote his E like that. Ask Daniel about the night of June 4th. The date. June 4th. That was the night Edgar collapsed in the study, hours after telling Caroline on the phone he'd made some major changes to his estate. If you've made it this far, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you get updated on other related content on our channel, because next, we crack open the family archive that reveals how long this betrayal had been brewing. The family gathered under one roof, reeling from a brutal murder, but when the lawyer opened the sealed will, the room turned ice cold. Gasp, accusations, and then silence, because what was supposed to bring clarity only revealed a decades-long deception that none of them were prepared to face. The morning after the discovery of Robert Mallory's body was quiet, too quiet for a family once bound by blood and fortune. The air inside the estate was thick with unspoken blame and tension. No one had slept well. Emma kept pacing. Stephen was downing his second whiskey before noon. And Judith, Robert's sister, sat with swollen eyes and trembling hands, refusing to speak unless spoken to. At precisely 10 a.m., the family attorney, Harold Kent, arrived in a charcoal gray suit, carrying the one thing none of them had the stomach for, Robert's updated will. The original plan had been for the will to be read at the end of the weekend, after the reunion. But Robert's sudden violent death changed that. The family gathered in the library, the same room where Robert's body had been discovered just 24 hours earlier. Emma sat closest to the fireplace, still visibly shaken. Stephen stood by the window, arms crossed. Judith took the armchair furthest from everyone, isolated even in grief. Harold cleared his throat. As per Robert's last wishes, updated just 5 weeks ago, I am obligated to read the revised document in full. He paused, glancing around the room. No one objected. The air was pin-drop still. To my dear wife, Emma, I leave the Lakewood estate and the sum of $500,000. Emma blinked. That was less than expected. Much less. To my sister, Judith Mallory, I leave the vineyard property in Sonoma and $100,000. Judith nodded slowly as if expecting no more. To my brother-in-law, Stephen, I leave nothing. Everyone turned towards Stephen, whose face had flushed an angry red. He clenched his jaw but said nothing. And then Harold continued more slowly now. The remainder of my estate, including the family business, Mallory Enterprises, its assets and all remaining financial holdings, shall be transferred in full to Daniel Marcus Whitmore, my son, born June 14, 1996, and placed under full trust until his 30th birthday. The room exploded. What? Emma shouted, standing up so fast her chair fell backward. What do you mean, his son? Who is that? Judith's mouth hung open, her fingers trembling violently. Robert didn't have a son. Not one I ever knew of. Stephen stepped forward, eyes wide. Daniel Whitmore? Isn't that? Harold opened a second envelope. Inside was a photograph of a young man, tall, dark-haired, with Robert's same sharp chin and eyes. Robert met Daniel's mother during his time in Vermont, over 2 decades ago. It was a brief affair, and until recently Robert didn't know he had a child. A paternity test confirmed the relationship 6 months ago. Emma's hands clutched her chest as if the air had been knocked from her lungs. He lied to me. All this time. Harold nodded gravely. Robert amended his will to reflect this discovery. He had already begun preparing Daniel to take over the company. Silence fell again. But this time it wasn't shock. It was rage. In the hours that followed, the storm that had brewed quietly over the years finally burst open. Emma sobbed in her bedroom, tearing through Robert's drawers looking for clues. Judith locked herself in her room and didn't speak for hours. And Stephen? Well, Stephen disappeared down into the basement and didn't come back up until nightfall. Daniel, for his part, had no idea he'd just inherited millions, or that his very existence had just detonated a family time bomb. Emma's reaction was the most unsettling. By late evening she was calm. Too calm. She joined Judith in the garden with 2 glasses of wine. Did you know? She asked Judith. No, Judith replied softly. Not a word. But maybe that's why Robert wanted the reunion. To tell us. To finally come clean. Emma stared into the night sky. He was going to give everything to that boy, and leave me with just this house. After everything I gave him. She smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was thin, hollow. Dead behind the eyes. You don't think, Judith hesitated, her voice shaking, someone killed him because of the will, do you? Emma didn't answer. She didn't need to. The next day, the detective in charge of the case, Detective Marianne Holder, returned to the estate. She had more questions. And this time she wasn't leaving until she had answers. Because a new name had just entered the frame. Daniel Marcus Whitmore. And if Robert Mallory was murdered just days before announcing his long-lost son as heir, then this was no ordinary family squabble. This was premeditated murder. And Detective Holder wasn't going to stop until she unraveled every lie. If you've been following the trail of secrets, betrayal, and blood money, Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you get updated on other related content on our channel, because now the legal fight for the family empire reveals the most shocking clause of all, and not everyone wants it brought to light. A will rewritten in secret, a hidden clause no one knew about, and a motive for murder written in legal ink. The death at the reunion wasn't random, it was orchestrated, signed, and sealed in the shadows of family greed. And when the truth started to surface, so did a second body. The days following Leonard Harrington's funeral were anything but quiet. Tensions that had once simmered under smiles and polite brunches now boiled into explosive accusations. The air in the Harrington estate, once filled with echoes of laughter and privilege, was now heavy with suspicion. Amelia, Leonard's widow, had all but retreated from public view. While most assumed she was grieving, those closer to the estate knew better. Amelia had become a fortress, only allowing her lawyer and her eldest daughter, Rachel, past her door. Rumors swirled that Leonard's will had been tampered with, and when his longtime legal advisor, Walter Green, suddenly took a leave of absence after the funeral, the whispers grew louder. Enter the clause. Rachel had been the first to hear about it, by accident. Leonard had shared a cryptic remark with her months before his death, a passing comment during a heated argument about the future of Harrington Textiles. "You all think this business will just fall into your laps," he had muttered. "But I've made arrangements. The company stays in the bloodline, my true bloodline." At the time, she thought it was just his way of keeping control. But now those words haunted her. And when she pressed Amelia for answers, her mother's reaction was cold and calculated. "Some secrets were never meant to be unearthed, Rachel. Not unless you're willing to lose more than your inheritance." But Rachel couldn't let it go. Through her connections with a junior associate at Harrington and Green Law, she was able to obtain a heavily redacted draft of Leonard's will. And there it was, buried in subsection 8, paragraph 3. The bloodline clause. "In the event of my death, ownership of Harrington Textiles and all related assets shall be transferred solely to my biological descendants. Should a dispute arise, a DNA audit of all claimants shall be conducted before probate distribution." That one sentence detonated a bomb across the family tree. The implications were seismic. It wasn't just a clause, it was a challenge. A call to strip away the carefully manicured image of a perfect family and test it with science. Whispers turned into confrontations. Cousins eyed each other with suspicion. Decades of affairs, estrangements, and quiet adoptions were suddenly back in play. And the biggest question of all? Who was Leonard referring to when he said true bloodline? Some suspected it meant excluding Amelia's side. Leonard's marriage had always been strained, and rumors of his infidelity stretched back decades. Others believed it was a targeted jab at his younger son, Carter, whose paternity had been questioned before. Carter had always been different. More bohemian than boardroom, more interested in jazz bars than textile margins. He'd also been the only one who'd vocally disagreed with selling part of the company to a Chinese equity firm, a deal that Amelia had championed. Suddenly, Carter wasn't just a black sheep, he was a threat. And then he vanished. Not in the metaphorical sense. Literally, his apartment was found empty 2 days after the clause was discovered. His car was still parked outside, keys on the kitchen counter, bank accounts untouched. His phone pinged one final location, a wooded area on the edge of the Harrington family land. Police found his body 48 hours later. Shot once in the chest. No signs of struggle. No weapon. No witnesses. Just a folded copy of the will in his jacket pocket, stained with blood. The death was ruled a suicide, but no one in the family believed it, especially not Rachel. She'd been the last person to speak with Carter, just hours before his disappearance. In that conversation, he had told her something cryptic. "If I disappear, look in the lawyer's safe. Everything Dad was hiding, everything he didn't want us to know, it's all there." Rachel tried to confront Walter Green, but he was still on leave and unreachable. The law firm gave her nothing but deflections. So she broke in. With the help of a former college friend, now a digital forensics consultant, Rachel accessed Green's office after hours. What they found inside the safe wasn't just shocking, it was shattering. A paternity test, dated 1995, showing that Carter was not Leonard's son. But even more devastating, another sealed document. A signed affidavit by Leonard himself, naming a previously unknown child from a 1980 affair as the sole heir to Harrington Textiles if the bloodline was compromised. A child no one in the family had ever met. A child who, according to Leonard's attached handwritten note, had recently reached out to him, under a false identity, during the family reunion. Rachel stared at the signature. Her mind spinning. Someone at that reunion, someone still close, wasn't who they claimed to be. Someone who knew they had a right to the fortune. Someone willing to kill to claim it. And the most terrifying part? They weren't done yet. If you've made it this far, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you get updated on other related content on our channel, because next, we piece together the conspiracy that was hidden in plain sight for years. What happens when a decades-old secret is exposed not by a detective, but by a dusty envelope hidden behind a family photo? The truth about Geraldine's murder wasn't just about one deadly night. It had been festering in sealed bank accounts, old business deals, and handwritten wills no one was supposed to find. But someone did. On the morning after the explosive confession at the family reunion, a heavy silence blanketed the Whitmore estate. The lavish mansion, once a symbol of old money and tradition, now felt like a stage set after the final act of a dark play. Police investigators were combing through every inch of the home. Geraldine Whitmore, the family's eldest matriarch and chairwoman of the multimillion-dollar agricultural empire, had been found strangled in the wine cellar. But the story didn't start there. It started 50 years earlier, with a secret no one ever expected to matter. As detectives processed the crime scene, the family members were placed in separate rooms for questioning. Whispers of betrayal and old grudges filled the air like static. And at the center of it all sat Eleanor Whitmore, Geraldine's only living sister, gripping a wrinkled, handwritten document that had been hidden inside an antique cigar box. It was the original will. Not the one filed by the family attorney that everyone had seen. This one was dated just months before their father's passing. It detailed a very different picture of who was meant to inherit the family fortune, and who wasn't. The will exposed a motive powerful enough to make anyone in the room a suspect. According to the original document, the family's agricultural conglomerate, worth over $100 million, was to be equally divided between Geraldine, Eleanor, and an illegitimate son named in careful script, Matthew Kane. Who the hell is Matthew Kane? Eleanor asked aloud. No one answered. But a sudden look crossed the face of Travis, Geraldine's nephew and the youngest son of Eleanor. A look that said he knew something, and had hoped no one would ever find out. Detectives shifted focus. What they learned in the next 24 hours would change everything. Geraldine had been harboring a truth she never dared speak. In her early 20s, she had fallen in love with a farmhand named Daniel Kane, long before her marriage to Reginald Whitmore. Their affair was brief but intense. And when she discovered she was pregnant, Geraldine's father forced the relationship to end and sent her away to handle the situation. She gave birth to a baby boy in secret. The child was raised by a foster family under the arrangement that he would never know his biological roots. His name? Matthew Kane. But Geraldine couldn't let go. Quietly, she set up a trust fund. And in her father's final days, she convinced him to add Matthew into the will. But that version of the will vanished. Or so everyone thought. Travis had always felt like an outsider in the Whitmore clan. He worked tirelessly in the family business but was never given the same authority as his cousins. When Geraldine threatened to restructure the leadership and give more power to someone outside the family, Travis grew suspicious. He found the hidden will by accident 2 weeks before the reunion, while searching through Geraldine's study for a deed she had asked for. The moment he read the name Matthew Kane, he panicked. Travis didn't just see an unknown cousin. He saw a threat. The murder wasn't a crime of passion. It was strategic, timed perfectly with the reunion when everyone would be under one roof, providing both opportunity and chaos for misdirection. Travis had disabled the CCTV feed in the wine cellar earlier that week. He had also accidentally switched out one of the antique wine openers, a sharp, curved steel tool, for a wire garrote he'd fashioned himself. Geraldine was lured into the cellar under the pretense of retrieving a rare bottle of wine for a toast she insisted on giving after dinner. But she never made it back up the stairs. Travis ambushed her, strangled her from behind, and dragged her body behind the wine racks. Then he returned upstairs to join the family gathering, his shirt neatly tucked, his demeanor cool. What Travis didn't anticipate was that Eleanor had kept copies of everything, including a scanned PDF of the original will on a password-protected USB, hidden in a jewelry box labeled, "To be opened upon my death." Geraldine had asked Eleanor to hold it just in case. When she heard of her sister's murder, Eleanor didn't just grieve, she suspected. She remembered the strange tension between Geraldine and Travis in the weeks before the reunion. She remembered the awkward glances, the family meetings where Geraldine began hinting at a long-lost chapter of their story. And most of all, she remembered Geraldine's final words to her the night before she was killed. "If something happens to me, don't trust anyone, not even your own son." The confession didn't come easily. Travis denied everything at first. But under the weight of evidence, the fingerprints on the wine opener, the deleted surveillance files recovered from the server, and Geraldine's own last-minute voice memo stored in her phone, he broke. The voice recording was brief. "Matthew, if you're hearing this, I'm sorry. I tried to do right by you. But this family, it's full of shadows. The murder was no longer a mystery. But the fallout? That would be even more devastating. If you've been following this twisted family saga, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss the shocking true stories we reveal next. Because today we expose the bloodline betrayal that tore this family apart forever." As the final puzzle piece clicks into place, a harrowing truth emerges. The murderer didn't just want money, he wanted legacy. The family name wasn't something to honor, it was a weapon to wield. And by the time the rest realized it, it was far too late. The courtroom was silent, holding its collective breath as the jury filed back in. Nearly a year had passed since the reunion that had torn the Delacroix family to shreds. Where once there had been toasts, laughter, and reluctant hugs beneath string lights and linen-covered tables, now there were only the ruins of a dynasty once built on real estate, oil, and a reputation that had masked rot from the beginning. At the defense table sat Mason Delacroix, unflinching. He wore a charcoal gray suit, the family crest pinned to his lapel like a cruel joke. The same crest that adorned the gates of the family's massive estate, the same one engraved into the cufflinks of the man he was accused of killing, his own uncle Leonard. Leonard had been the patriarch in all but name. With no children of his own, he had quietly orchestrated much of the family fortune's survival through downturns and recessions. Mason had always been his favorite, or so Leonard thought. That favoritism would cost him his life. The courtroom buzzed with quiet whispers as the foreperson handed the judge a folded slip. Mason didn't flinch when the verdict was read. "Guilty." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Ava Delacroix, Mason's sister and the one who had cracked the case wide open, covered her mouth, not in surprise, but in grief. Because while justice had finally spoken, it didn't erase the memory of the night she discovered the handwritten will hidden in Leonard's study. A will that would have changed everything. One that named Ava, not Mason, as Leonard's sole heir. The motive had been so painfully obvious in retrospect. Leonard, aging but sharp as ever, had pulled Ava aside during the reunion. "I need you to come by the office next week," he whispered. "There's something I want to talk to you about before I finalize the papers." Ava assumed it was just another investment meeting. But Leonard had other plans. He was cutting Mason out, not out of malice but out of necessity. He'd seen the recklessness, the ambition turning bitter, the resentment behind every forced smile. "He's not who he pretends to be," Leonard had said, looking into the fire. "And I won't let him destroy what's taken generations to build." But Mason had overheard the entire conversation. And by the time Ava arrived at the office 3 days later, Leonard was already dead. The coroner initially ruled it a heart attack, until Ava noticed the shredded piece of the will in the fireplace. Half-burned but still legible. She brought it to the authorities. What followed was a forensic frenzy. Digital forensics, financial records, life insurance policies altered weeks before Leonard's death. Surveillance footage of Mason entering Leonard's home that night. Trace amounts of potassium chloride, the drug used to mimic cardiac arrest, on the whiskey decanter Mason had gifted his uncle. During Mason's trial, the prosecution dropped a bombshell, a voice recording recovered from Leonard's smart speaker. He'd accidentally recorded his final moments, an argument, a betrayal. "You think you're smarter than the rest of us," Leonard's voice rasped. "But this is murder, Mason." And then silence. The audio shook the courtroom. Mason's defense was obliterated. But the tragedy didn't end there. The Delacroix family business collapsed within months of Mason's conviction. Investors pulled out. Partners distanced themselves. Properties were liquidated. Ava tried to pick up the pieces, but the stain was too deep. For a while, she left public life. Moved across the country. Changed her last name. She gave one interview, just one. "He was my brother," she said, voice trembling. "I wanted to believe he was just angry or jealous. But he was cold. I don't think he saw us as family. We were just pawns in the story he was writing for himself. And now there's nothing left." Mason never showed remorse. At his sentencing, he said only one thing. "I did what had to be done. The family name will live on through me." He was sentenced to life without parole. The Delacroix mansion was later bought by a private developer and turned into a boutique hotel. Tourists still ask about the rumors, about the murder in the library, the hidden safe behind the bookshelf, the cursed crest etched into the fireplace. They never hear the full truth. Because some family secrets don't get buried, they echo. Sometimes the greatest danger comes not from strangers, but from those who share your name. Greed, betrayal, and a decades-old secret left blood on the floor of what should have been a celebration. But in this family, reunions don't end with hugs, they end with handcuffs. If this story gripped you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another chilling deep dive into real-life betrayals, crimes, and secrets that hide in plain sight. Your next obsession is just one click away. And tell us, was justice really served? Or was there more lurking beneath the surface? Drop your thoughts in the comments.